And without further ado, I'll introduce Bob. And Bob I've known for quite a number of years now, I think, Bob, isn't it? Because Bob used to be, Bob and I were in the Norwich South Rotary Club, and Bob was already there when I joined, and we've got to know each other quite well. And he was also the rector. Is it rector or vicar? Rector.
Rector, yeah.
The rector in the village next to mine. So so we've had an association on and off for a number of years. So welcome. And, he's now actually the rector for a ministry of I don't know whether it's a ministry in an area of Thetford, and I'll leave Bob to maybe just describe all of that. So welcome, Bob, and over to you to just talk about a few anecdotes of the life of a country vicar.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much. And it's good to do this. I've never done it before, so it's a good experience. I have done one or two things in front of the camera once or twice, but never quite like this. So thank you for the invitation. And just to explain, I'm a Church of England vicar. I've been a vicar for over 30 years now. I was in a place called Brundall, just near where Martin lives, outside Norwich. And I'm now team rector of Thetford, which is on the Norfolk-Suffolk border. If you've ever served in Afghanistan or Iraq, you will almost certainly have done some military training here, because it's a big military training area just outside Thetford. And most of the people who go to Afghanistan spend some time here. So I'm just going to chat for a few minutes about what I do. I'll try and keep an eye on the clock so I don't send you all to sleep. But if you all disappear from the screen, I shall know I have done. But I want to ask you a question first, really. What would you say was the difference, one of the key differences between what I do and what you do? I don't know what your jobs are, if you're still working, but if when you were working, what would you say was the most significant difference between a vicar and, say, a farmer or a solicitor or a teacher or a lorry driver, whatever? And just think about it for a second. Anyone want to offer any suggestions?
I don't get my appraisals done by the highest authority in the world. So.
Well, there are lots of differences, of course. What most people say is, well, you're doing it for God, and that's generally the point you're making, Martin. But one of the key differences is the way we get paid. Most people get paid for what they do. Vicars don't. A vicar actually gets paid not to work. Most people get paid for the work they do. Vicars get paid not to work. And what that means in practice is that we get an allowance, a living allowance, not very much, but enough. We get a nice house to live in. We get a few other benefits in kind, and but we don't actually get paid for the work that we do. And the reason for that is that gives us the freedom to do whatever we think God might want us to do. And I don't want to preach a sermon to you, so don't get alarmed by my mention of God, because I know that in Rotary you're not supposed to talk about God at all, but it's quite difficult when you're a vicar not to talk about God a little bit. But because I'm a vicar and because I'm a Christian, I try to sort of model what I do on what Jesus did, and he basically divided his work in 4 ways. And I'm going to tell you what 3 of them are and ask you if you can guess what the 4th is. The first is that he spent a little time in prayer. He used to spend time alone with God, and most vicars try and do that. In fact, it's almost the only legal requirement of our job is that we say our prayers every day. We're supposed to take a service on a Sunday, but apart from that, there's no job description except that you say your prayers. So that's pretty interesting in its own way. But the second bit is the sort of public bit, and often that's the bit that most people see. We take services, we take school assemblies, we do all kinds of other stuff, and we do all sorts of things in public. And most people have their view about it. One of the privileges of my job is I've been able to preach in all sorts of places, from little village chapels to St. Paul's Cathedral. And St. Paul's Cathedral is an interesting place because you have sort of thousands of tourists ambling around while you're trying to say your little bit. So it's quite an interesting challenge. I might say that in most of the places I've been asked to preach, I've only been asked once. So, you know, it's quite good for the humility, but occasionally they ask me back. And part of that public stuff is the weddings and funerals and things, and they always produce some interesting stories. The worst wedding I ever did was of my next door neighbour. My next door neighbour got married, nice girl. She was marrying a policeman who was also a nice guy. But I thought there was something odd about this wedding from the very beginning, because she had bought a house with her fiance, and she wanted everything in her house to be exactly the same as her mum had at home. So they bought this house, took out all the nice carpets that were in it and put other carpets in the same as mum's carpets. She had to have the same cooker and the same fridge and everything else. And I happened to live next door to this girl. And on the day of the wedding, I looked out the window and saw her in the garden. Oh, I should say that her father and mother went to amazing lengths to do this wedding. They weren't a particularly wealthy couple, but they had their front door repainted so it would be a contrasting colour to the bride's dress. They relayed the garden in the house so there'd be a nice area to take photographs. The father of the bride had his teeth reset so they looked good on the photographs. And they went to incredible lengths to make this wedding a big day that it was. And on the day of the wedding, I was getting dressed upstairs, and I looked out the window and saw that they were having their photographs taken in the garden. And this girl kept sort of tipping her head back, as I'm doing now, tipping her head back, and it looked very odd. And I wondered why the photographer was telling her to do that. I discovered later that when she woke up that morning, she decided that she didn't want to get married. And she said to her mum, or she said to her dad first, I think, Dad, I'm not going to go through with this. I don't want to get married. And her dad said, Carol, I've had my teeth set for this wedding, and I've relayed the grass, and I've painted the front door. You are going to get married. And he said, it's just nerves, so take a couple of these tranquilizers, you'll feel better. And then she said to her mum, a bit later on, Mum, I don't want to go through with this. I don't want to get married. And her mum said, don't be so silly, Carol, it's just nerves. Take a couple of pills. And by the time the photographer arrived, Carol was overdosing on these pills. She couldn't cope. So all the twitching of the head was actually the medication, not the reality. Anyway, the Rolls Royce arrived at the house, and Carol's dad said, okay, Carol, we're off. And she said, Dad, I'm not going. And he said, yes, you are. And he picked her up and with the driver of the Rolls Royce, carried her out to the car, put her in the back of the car and drove to the church, which is only about 100 yards away, by the way. But they had to have a Rolls Royce to get there. And she got out of the Rolls Royce. I think at that point she gave up the struggle and she came into church and got married. But no sooner had she signed the register than she collapsed in a heap on the floor. So they called the ambulance, and her mum said, right, I'm going to the hospital with my daughter. And the bridegroom said, I'm going to hospital with my wife. And the father said, Bob, I'm going to hospital with my family. You'll have to take care of the reception. So they all disappeared. We had a fantastic wedding reception with no bride, no bride's parents, no groom, and no bridesmaids. But we all had a jolly good time. The food was lovely. That wedding was pretty bad, but I then had one that was described in The Sun as the wedding from hell. And that, I am happy to say, was nothing to do with me, but it was one of those weddings where everything in the church was absolutely fine. But after that, everything fell apart. The wedding cake collapsed at the reception. Various other things went wrong at the reception. The car broke down on the way to the airport. The plane was delayed. When they got to the hotel, it wasn't finished. Everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong. And the crowning glory was that when they got home, they discovered that their house had been broken into, and the person who'd taken a video of their wedding very kindly put it through the front door, but it had been stolen. So the only record they had of only video record they had of their wedding was gone. And they subsequently appealed in the local press to to get this video back, and that was how the story began to get circulated more widely. And I had people ringing me up from Canada and Australia and all sorts of places to ask me about the wedding from hell, which the son, as the son helpfully described it. Thankfully, I was able to say it was nothing to do with me. It was other people's bits that went wrong, not mine. So we have some pretty interesting experiences with weddings. We also have some pretty interesting experiences with funerals, let me tell you. You may think that nothing ever goes wrong at a funeral, and I can tell you that it's very, very rare for anything to go wrong at a funeral. But just occasionally it does. I remember on one occasion getting to the graveside and finding there was no grave because the gravedigger had put the wrong date in his diary. One or two things like that. In fact, I remember one occasion when no sooner had the mourners disappeared from the churchyard than the funeral director took the coffin out of the hole, put it back in the hearse and took it back to his yard, because he hadn't actually got permission to do the burial. The body hadn't been seen by a doctor. So things like that do happen from time to time, but we try not to tell families about it because it's exceptionally distressing. And the key thing about doing a funeral, of course, is you want to help the family as much as possible. But please be reassured, that is very, very rare. The vast majority of funeral directors are brilliant and they do a fantastic job. One of the great things about this job is you meet the most interesting people, and the most interesting people are not necessarily the high and mighty. I have met quite a few famous people in the time I've been doing this. My wife always says when people ask her if she's ever met the Queen, she says, yeah, she poured me a cup of coffee once, which is absolutely true. We went to Sandringham once to meet the Queen. I won't go into all the details, but we sat in her living room at Sandringham and she poured us a coffee, which was, you know, something for the history books. And I've met her once or twice at other other occasions too. But the most interesting people are the ordinary people, and I particularly love living in Norfolk because Norfolk people are fantastic. And I remember on one occasion, which was also connected with the Queen, I had a letter from the bishop to say the Queen was coming to Norwich Cathedral to do the Maundy Thursday service, which she does every year in a different cathedral around the country. And I was asked to nominate somebody to meet the Queen and receive the Maundy money. So I went to see this chap, Walter, fantastic old boy who lived in our parish. He was a great pillar of the community, did all sorts of good stuff. And I said to Walter, the bishop has asked me if I would like to nominate somebody for the Maundy service, and I'd like to nominate you. And Walter said, oh, he hummed and hawed a bit, and he said, well, he said, would I get to meet the Queen? And I said, yes, you probably would get to meet the Queen. And he said, would she talk to me? And I said, yeah, she would. And she'd give you some Maundy money. He said, oh, she'd give me some money, would she? So that'd be all right, yeah. So anyway, he hummed and hawed for quite a long time. And then he said, all right, he said, yeah, you can put my name forward. That'll be okay. So we chatted about other things. And just as I was leaving, I said to him, okay, Walter, I'll write to the bishop. I'll tell him that you're happy to do this. And the next thing you'll hear will be from the cathedral. They'll ring you up and tell you what you've got to do. So Walter, just as I was leaving, just as I was about to go out the door, Walter looked up and he said, hang on a minute. He said, I can't go. And I said, what do you mean you can't go? He said, well, you said it's a Thursday. I said, yes, it's Maundy Thursday. I go to Great Yarmouth to do my shopping on a Thursday. He said, I can't go and meet the Queen. So, and he didn't go. And the tail end of the story is I happened to meet the Dean of Norwich, and on the day the Queen came, she had lunch with the Dean, and the Dean told her this story. So she was apparently rather tickled to know that Walter wasn't there because he was doing his shopping in Great Yarmouth, thought that was more important than meeting her. And why not? You know, what's so great about that? You know, it's I rather like that kind of humble approach to life. In fact, once I was in Sandringham and I said to one of the members of the church, I was talking to a member of the church there, and he said, well, I must be going because I'm going up to the big house for a party tonight. He worked on the Sandringham estate, and when the Queen is there at Christmas, they have a party for all the estate workers. And I said to him, well, that'd be nice. That should be nice. He said, well, he said, not really. He said, because we have to go, but there's a lot of people there I don't really want to get to know, and they don't really want to get to know me either. And of course, he was quite right. And that kind of philosophical approach to life is typical of Norfolk people, and I think one of the great things about what we do. So there's all that stuff. We do all that public stuff. Then we do private stuff. People come to us one-to-one and we talk to them about all sorts of things. Lady turned up on my doorstep once and she said, can I come in? I knew the lady. She was a teacher at the local school, happily married with 2 children. And she said to me, I want to be a man. Can you tell me what you think? She wanted to change gender. She had been a woman all her life as far as everybody else was concerned. But she told me that she always felt within herself that she was a man. And what did I think about it? Well, it's not the sort of question you get asked every day as a vicar, let me tell you. But I was able to talk to her about it. What she really wanted to know was, what will people in the village think if I tell them I'm now a man? She talked it through with her husband. He was happy for her to become a man because he knew that she was, this has been something that's been important to her for a long time. And her children had to accept the fact that they were now going to have 2 fathers and no mother. Very interesting situation, but she did become a man, and she told all the people she taught, you know, from now on you've got to call me Mr. instead of Mrs. And she changed her name and carried on life quite happily, I think, as a man from that moment on. Although many people found it quite difficult to cope with, as you can imagine. Then one day a chap turned up on my doorstep. He rang the bell. He said, can I come and talk to you? Complete stranger. I said to him, yes, come in. And he came in and sat down in my study. And I said to him, how can I help you? He said, I've murdered my wife. And I said, do you take bookings? He said, no. He said, he had murdered his wife some years before. But because he'd murdered his wife, he hadn't been able to go to the funeral. He was in custody. He murdered his wife, by the way, by waiting till she was in the bath. She happened to have an electric fire in the bathroom, and he went in and picked up the electric fire and put it in the bath with her, which wasn't really a good thing to do. And she was murdered. And he wanted to talk to me because he hadn't been able to come to the funeral, and he wanted to know where her grave was because he wanted to go and pay his respects. Can you pay your respects to somebody who murdered? I don't know. But my wife was slightly alarmed when as he sat in my office, I said, I'll go and make a cup of tea. And I said to my wife in the kitchen, I've got somebody in the front room who's a murderer. He's murdered his wife and he wants my advice. So she was a bit anxious about my safety for a little while, but it was all okay in the end. So we do meet some fascinating and interesting people, and sometimes some very unexpected things arrive on our doorstep. Sometimes, of course, absolutely horrific things, because we have to deal with terrible accidents, tragedies. And the good thing about our job is that we also deal with many of the happy occasions in life, and that makes it a bit more bearable than people who have to deal with accidents and disasters all the time. I think I've probably said enough, haven't I? But let me just ask you a question. I'm talking about 3 things that we do. We do the sort of, we say our prayers, we do public things, we do private things. The 4th thing that we do is the 4th thing that Jesus did, which we tend not to do very well, is prepare people to take over from us when we're no longer here. And one of the things the church is very bad at today is getting people, the next generation of vicars, up and running. We've actually got quite a lot of people coming forward at the moment to be vicars, but not enough, because there's too many of us too near to retirement, and that makes it a bit more difficult. Well, it's just a little hint of what I do, and I'm happy to take some questions. I do various other things. I'm also a church commissioner. In fact, I've been in London today at a church commissioners meeting, and the church commissioners, as you know, manage the assets of the Church of England. We have a fund of around £6.4 billion at the moment, which has gone up considerably during the recession. Our investments have done fantastically well. We have a very talented team of investment managers who don't get paid great bonuses, but who do a fantastic job for us. And they generate the money which contributes towards the well-being of the church. But it costs about £1 billion a year, over £1 billion a year to run the Church of England. And the church commissioners contribute about 200 million of that. The rest of it, almost all of the rest of it, comes from people like you putting money in the plate and making regular donations to the church. £750 million a year is given to the Church of England. It's a phenomenal sum when you look at children in need, for instance, raising perhaps 40 or 50 million a year. Most of the other big charities raising that sort of sum. Church of England raises £750 million a year through the giving of its members. I think that's fantastic. It's a hugely expensive operation to run, of course, because we've got so many old buildings that cost an absolute fortune, and so many old vicars who are very expensive to run as well. But for the most part, it's an astonishing story of people's generosity, and it shows that people, for all the fact that not so many people go to church now, people do value the church, and they want it to continue in some form or other, even if they don't happen to like their local vicar much, or don't want to spend time going to their local church very much. Thank you very much for listening, guys. I'll have some questions and anything to do with what I've said or what I haven't said, if you think it's relevant.
Okay, thank you, Bob, and most welcome. I'll open the meeting up to questions. Those who have got their microphones muted, obviously, if you want to unmute them when you ask the question, like I didn't.
I should just warn you, my hearing is not great, so if I ask you to repeat something, that's probably me, not you. Right.
Okay. Two things. Firstly, thank you for the talk, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But I meant to introduce you and wish you a happy birthday for Saturday, and
yes,
Alan Berry a happy birthday for tomorrow. And I think you're coming of age, I think, on Saturday. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I become an old age pensioner on Saturday, so a very significant moment in my life. Yeah. My children say I've been an old man for a very long time, but there we go.
Well, you're in the Rotary, so what do you expect? I mean,
absolutely, yeah.
Anybody got any particular questions? No? Okay. I've got one, which is the inevitable one, which is I'd like your view on the controversial subject of women vicars.
Well.
Sorry to drop that one on you, Bob. Do you want me to turn the recording off?
I've actually changed my position on this, because I was for 20 years a member of the Church of England's General Synod, and so I participated in the original vote to allow women vicars back in 1994, and at that time I voted against it. I didn't think it was right. Since then I've changed my mind, partly because I've worked with some brilliant women vicars. In fact, I have a colleague here in Thetford who is absolutely superb. She's doing a fantastic job, and the church that she looks after is growing steadily and flourishing. And I've met quite a number like that, so that's partly why. But I do respect the position of those who don't agree with it.
Well, did you have a job before being a vicar, or did you go straight into being a vicar?
Yeah, when I left school, I worked for a firm of architects in London. I was trained to be an architect, and I did that for a couple of years. And then various people said to me, "Had you ever thought of becoming a vicar?" And I had thought of becoming a vicar, so I gave that up and went off to university. In those days, education was free. Your county council paid for your university fees and everything else, and I had 6 years of full-time education paid for by other people, which was fantastic. My mother was a widow because my father died when I was very young, so she couldn't have afforded it. And in today's world, I probably wouldn't have been able to have that privileged education.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. And anyone else before I go to the vote of thanks?
Yeah. Can I ask a
James.
question, Martin? I would describe myself as very firmly Church of Dawkins, I guess, you know, and I guess the issue is there's similarities between the church and Rotary as we see it in relation to the requirement to modernise and bring itself up to date with today's world. Do you see that in being a Rotarian and being in the church as well in relation to a changing society out there? And is that why organisations are improving and increasing their membership when the traditional membership organisations are seeing a fairly substantial, to be honest?
Yeah. Well, in the setup I'm in at the moment, we have 6 churches, and we try to provide an incredible range of stuff. So the woman vicar I was just talking about is vicar of a church where it's hardly recognisable as the Church of England. All the words and music are on a screen rather than in the hymn book. There's no organ music, it's all a band. There's a band that plays, very talented band actually, that accompanies all the singing. And then, but we also have at the opposite end of the spectrum in one of our churches, which is entirely from the Book of Common Prayer. So it's old-fashioned language. We read from the authorized version of the Bible. We have traditional hymns, organ music, psalms, and so on. So we try and provide the whole range of stuff. But what's interesting is that it tends to be the extremes that prosper. Very traditional services or very modern ones. And churches which are kind of half-heartedly modernised tend not to do so well. And that would be our experience here, and it's been my experience elsewhere as well. But of course, for the most part, it's the churches which are more modern in their approach, which are really flourishing in the Church of England at the moment. The opposite side of that, of course, is our cathedrals are flourishing, and they are very traditional, very conventional in the way they worship. And cathedral attendance is going up quite dramatically at the moment.
And the proportion of younger people coming in, Bob, are there an increasing number of younger people coming in?
Well, again, it would be in the modern, more lively churches where there are good numbers of young people and good children's work going on. We have some children in our church here, but that's one of the big challenges.
Yeah.
But the other side of that is that one of the things we've done here is that we have opened a church school, and that is a fantastic experience and is really flourishing, because parents want their children to come to church schools because we provide good education, but we also provide that spiritual and moral framework which a lot of parents value and want for their children.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Any other final questions? Okay. Thank you, Bob, for an entertaining talk about the life of a country vicar. As always, you are, as I said to you last night, you're a fantastic raconteur, and you've told me the most on-PC jokes in my life that I think I still use from time to time, and I value that, and I value the friendship that we've had. You mentioned about the Queen. I don't know whether I said this in my talk a couple of weeks ago, but just a quick story about the Queen. I was actually chairman of Crime Stoppers for the area, and when they opened the new regional centre at Wymondham, the regional police headquarters in Wymondham, there were 2 stories that actually brought a smile from face, and you just reminded me of those. One was, was I going to meet the Queen? Yes, I was, and so I was trained to say Ma'am first time round, and then mum as in jam later on, and all of that. Anyway, she did come along and she did talk to me, and she was talking to me about Crime Stoppers, and of course Crime Stoppers' tenet is that it has to be totally confidential. The cornerstone of Crime Stoppers is that it is absolutely anonymous, and she was really, really well versed, and I just thought she'd come and say, "Oh, hello, my man," and wander off, but she's started to have a conversation with me, and we had the conversation about the value of the anonymity and the importance of anonymity. And I always remember these words. She says, "Well, when one grasses one up, one has to be really careful, doesn't one?" and I was taken totally by surprise, because and I obviously looked aghast. So she went, "Don't worry, my dear, I got that off EastEnders." Oh, and then wandered off.
Well,
And in the meantime, go on.
yeah. My experience, one of my experiences meeting the Queen was that somebody who obviously didn't like me nominated me to be rector of Sandringham. She was interviewing future vicars of Sandringham because the guy she had was due to retire. And the Queen employs a lot of people, as you can imagine, but there are only two jobs that she personally interviews for. One is the rector of Sandringham and the other is the Dean of Windsor. And she invited me and a couple of other vicars and our wives to go to Sandringham. And thankfully I didn't get the job, but it was very interesting. But one of the interesting things was that we looked around these 6 churches in West Norfolk. It was January, so freezing cold. And she said to me, she said, did you go to Wolverton Church? And I said, yeah, we did, yes. And very nice. She said, when you came out of the church, did you see a farmhouse across the field? And I said, yes, I did. I did because it had been pointed out to me by the church warden. She said, that's where we live. That's where we live.
Right.
She does. She and Philip live in this farmhouse when they're in Norfolk.
Oh, they don't live in
They don't live
Sandringham.
in Sandringham House. They do all the official functions there. But they actually live in this farmhouse. And I got the distinct impression that he really just wants to retire and live in this house with her horses and walking the dogs and all of that. But she's so committed to, you know, and when I had that experience, she was already over 80, you know, and it was very odd because we were sitting in her lounge in front of the fire, you know, and you're sitting there thinking, this is just like visiting any old lady in my parish. But she's head of state of 39 countries or whatever it is, you know.
Yeah.
And it's just really difficult to get your head around because it was just like a normal conversation with an ordinary person. She was absolutely lovely. And I'm a great admirer of hers. And I would have been honoured to do the job, but I didn't really want the job because of all the hassle that comes with it. Somebody rather helpfully said to me, you know, when you're standing next to the Queen, you'll be one of the most likely terrorist targets in the world for a sniper.
I must admit that my recollection of the experience with her was that she was much more amenable, much more conversational than I thought she was going to be, and that was fantastic, and it changed my view of her particularly. So thank you, Bob, for that.
Great pleasure. Thank you very much, everyone.
And it's been a very enjoyable experience. So in our usual way, thank you all, and let's show our appreciation. Okay.
Thank you very much. That's very kind of you.